The chief flight attendant's voice rang out, coldly, ripping through the quiet of the first-class cabin. "I'll say this one last time. Please leave this seat and move to the back. If you don't, I'll call security." Each word landed like a cruel decree, polite on the surface but dripping with contempt. Amara Morgan, a young black woman and CEO of Right Skies Airlines, remained seated in the front row. She lifted her head, her gaze as calm as dawn, her voice soft but unwavering. "I've already told you, I'm not moving." There was no anger in her tone, only a strange, steady strength that made those around her uneasy, as if they were witnessing something entirely unexpected. Amara had just been publicly humiliated in a full cabin, under the watchful eyes of dozens of strangers. Yet no one could have predicted that, just minutes later, this unassuming woman would rise and reveal her true identity, upending the entire flight. Late afternoon sunlight from Los Angeles slanted through the thick windows, reflecting off the glossy caramel leather seats of Flight RS-472's first-class cabin, where every detail, from the gold-plated clock to the smooth jazz playing overhead, flaunted luxury and exclusivity. Everyone here knew their place, tailored suits, Swiss watches glinting, accustomed to having their every need met. At that moment, the cabin door opened. Amara Morgan, a 29-year-old black CEO already on the Forbes Under 30 list, stepped inside quietly. She wore a perfectly tailored navy suit, a crisp white blouse, and simple black heels. Her hair was pinned neatly at the nape of her neck. The only jewelry she wore was a plain silver band on her ring finger. In one hand, she carried her phone, and in the other a slim laptop bag, her expression composed, her stride unhurried and unpretentious. No one, not even the guests deep in animated stock market talk, realized that this young woman owned the very airline they were flying. She was like a cool breeze in a stifling room as she walked toward the seat marked on her ticket. Up front, Lauren Briggs, the 42-year-old chief flight attendant with her blonde hair perfectly coiffed, her uniform immaculate, her makeup flawless, and her icy blue-gray eyes framed by thick mascara, had just given a warm welcome to billionaire couple Richard and Evelyn Thompson, longtime VIP customers. Polite greetings, bright smiles, the practiced bow. It was all reserved for them. Lauren had lifted Mrs. Thompson's handbag, adjusted her neck pillow, and poured 2 glasses of top-shelf champagne. But the instant Amara Morgan crossed into first class, Lauren's practiced hospitality froze. Her steely eyes scanned Amara's hair, her skin, the unmarked suit, pausing at the simple black pumps. The smile fell from Lauren's face, replaced by a guarded, suspicious look. She stepped into Amara's path, her tone laced with condescension and feigned concern. "I hope you're not in the wrong cabin, ma'am." Her words hung in the air like a chilly gust, causing the cabin to fall silent for a heartbeat. A few passengers glanced over, some frowned, but all stayed quiet, as if waiting to see how this outsider would respond and how Lauren, the one in control, would handle it. Outside the window, the sunset was fading. Inside, an undercurrent of prejudice was rippling outward, and no one, not even Lauren, had any idea that within the next hour, this quietly resolute woman would change everything. Lauren Briggs's question still echoed coldly as Amara Morgan came to a gentle stop, her polite smile unwavering. She never lost her composure. Instead, she simply held out her phone, the bright screen showing her e-ticket, seat 2A, first class, name, Amara Morgan. But Lauren didn't even glance at it. Her icy eyes skimmed over Amara's dark skin and unbranded suit before locking onto her face with a look that said, without words, "Who do you think you are?" Lauren refused to budge. Rather than follow standard procedure, checking the ticket, verifying the passenger, She stood her ground in the aisle, her voice now sharp and laced with the superior sarcasm. "This area is reserved for genuine priority guests. If you've made a mistake, I'll be happy to escort you to economy." Amara kept her calm gaze and simply repeated, "I believe I'm in the right seat." She wasn't arrogant or defensive, just quietly determined, that special kind of strength people develop after facing prejudice so often they refuse to be victims. At that moment, all eyes in first class turned toward them. A few seats over, Daniel Green, a 45-year-old businessman in a plaid shirt and navy tie, his eyes bright but hardened by the corporate world, watched in silence. Daniel usually saw everything as a deal to be struck, but right now he noticed Lauren hadn't bothered to check Amara's ticket. Something felt off, and though he'd witnessed countless unspoken social screenings, he felt unease stir in his chest, but like many before him, he stayed silent. Across the aisle, Megan Sinclair, her golden hair shining, Cartier frames perched on her nose, a pristine white Chanel coat draped over her shoulders, leaned toward her companion and whispered loudly enough for half the cabin to overhear. "Another free upgrade, I guess. Probably some new special priority program." Her voice dripped with bitterness and entitlement, the assumption that anyone not known to privilege must be a fraud. Silence descended over the cabin like a weight heavier than any physical barrier. Glances flicked over, eyebrows lowered, soft sighs sounded. No one spoke up for Amara, but everyone sensed something was wrong. These high-rolling passengers didn't need words to decide who belonged here and who didn't. Lauren felt the unspoken support of the majority, the silent backing that had protected her for years in luxury service, letting her wield the rules however she saw fit, riding on the quiet consensus of her privilege ecosystem. Deep down, she wasn't convinced she was in the wrong. To her, upholding the standards of first class was a duty, and the final power her uniform granted her in a world where she was otherwise just a pawn among giants. Lauren stepped even closer, abandoning any pretense of friendliness. "If you can't show me your membership card, I'll have to ask you to leave. Priority passengers have special credentials. I know them all by name." Amara stood her ground, phone still raised, eyes steady and unflinching as they met Lauren's. "I'm on the manifest, and my ticket is valid. That's all the proof I need." The air grew denser. Some passengers turned away, pretending to read magazines. Others stared at their phone screens to escape the collective shame taking shape. In an instant, this posh cabin transformed into a silent arena, a battleground of prejudice, suspicion, and complicity forming an impenetrable wall. Lauren's lips curved into a half-smile, that smile of someone accustomed to victory by the crowd's silence. She didn't realize that in that moment she'd sown the seeds of a storm no privileged barrier could contain. Outside the window, darkness was creeping in over the last streaks of sunset. Inside, prejudice had claimed its footing, poised for its first showdown in the skies above America. The silence in the cabin hadn't even broken before Lauren Briggs took another step forward, asserting her authority at the very heart of first class, confident that unspoken rules and the silent nods of her fellow passengers would shield her from any consequences. Her voice rang out, cold and unwavering, as though she were simply doing her daily job, as though her uniform alone gave her the right to decide who belonged here. "I don't see your name on the manifest. If you're not a priority passenger, please proceed to economy. Otherwise, I'll have to call security." The entire cabin froze. A ripple of hushed whispers spread like a chain reaction. Many guests looked up from their newspapers, magazines, and phones, casting quick glances at Amara that mixed curiosity, skepticism, and barely concealed annoyance. Even a momentary disruption in this immaculate space felt like a personal affront to them. In places like this, no one wants to speak up, because a single act of dissent could get you cut out of the privileged world they cling to. Amara remained perfectly still, her expression unshaken. That calm was more than the practiced mask of someone world-weary. It was the residue of thousands of invisible trials she'd already endured, from boardrooms to hotel lobbies to airplane cabins, and overcome. She replied evenly, her words clear and respectful, but not a bit weak. I suggest you double-check the manifest before passing judgment. Her voice carried just enough for everyone to hear, yet it felt almost like a gentle warning. It didn't faze Lauren. It only made her bristle. Deep in Lauren's eyes burned the anger of someone whose control was being challenged on her own turf. With years of luxury service experience, Lauren knew exactly how to exploit the soft underbelly of authority, and she used every gray area between policy and personal prejudice to maintain her unchallenged position in this cabin. Lauren's tone hardened as she leaned in, emphasizing her role as gatekeeper. I know exactly who belongs here. Those words cut through the air like a blade. It wasn't just a refusal, it was a verdict delivered without trial, because to Lauren, any ticket or identity could be nullified by a single glance, fueled by a lifetime of bias. Some passengers, like Megan Sinclair, smirked, letting a faint, satisfied smile cross their lips, as though they expected Amara to quietly back down. Others shifted uncomfortably, unsettled but lacking the courage to intervene, choosing instead to hover on the periphery like bystanders to a cold river. Daniel Green, one of the few who sensed something deeply wrong in Lauren's actions, frowned, but still held his tongue. He'd seen polite decorum trampled by blind power too many times, yet he'd also watched those who tried to stand up become targets of the silent snub in high society. He hesitated, eyes fixed on Lauren, trying to read the real motive behind her rigid stance. In Lauren's mind, every subtle move Amara made threatened her status, her authority, and the delicate order she'd worked so hard to maintain. To Lauren, Amara wasn't just another passenger. She was a disruption to the carefully balanced world of first class, a sign that a new era was dawning where the excluded might reclaim their place without asking permission. Lauren leveled a gaze at Amara, equal parts challenge, chill, and a flicker of fear she didn't even realize she felt. I won't say it again. If you don't comply, I'll call security on board. In that moment, the cabin seemed to freeze solid. All eyes were locked on the two women, one, the representative of the old guard desperate to cling to power at any cost, the other, the calm embodiment of change, quiet but unyielding, small but indomitable. Outside, darkness had swallowed the runway, leaving only artificial lights and the tense beating of hearts as witnesses to this confrontation, proof that the real explosion was still to come, and that anyone choosing to stay silent could become either a bystander or an accomplice to injustice. The cabin air feels thick with invisible pressure. Under the harsh white lights, Amara and Lauren stand facing each other, surrounded by the silent crowd who'd rather linger at the edges of any conflict. Yet, the longer the tension drags on, the more flustered and unsteady Lauren Briggs becomes. Amara's almost uncanny calm, neither yielding nor attacking, reflects back everything Lauren desperately wants to deny, the absurdity of prejudice-based power. Lauren turns, searching for support among the familiar passengers. But this time, the silent complicity isn't there to shield her. In that moment, Daniel Green, the man who'd been content to observe, speaks up unexpectedly, his deep, steady voice carrying the weight of years of experience and a keen sense of justice. I think it would be best to double-check the manifest. In your position, nothing's worse than humiliating someone undeservedly, right? Daniel's words ring out loud enough for everyone to hear. His usual cool detachment hardens into sternness, like a wake-up call slipping through each person's defensive armor. A few passengers visibly shift. Megan Sinclair frowns. Younger travelers exchange uneasy glances, and Richard Thompson leans toward his wife, clearly dismayed by the tension Lauren has created. Lauren bites her lip, gripping the passenger roster as if it were a lifeline. Her gaze wavers. For the first time since takeoff, she feels the real threat of losing control. In a bid to salvage her confidence, she blurts out a line as cutting as any blade slicing through polished etiquette. Can't you tell what kind of person she is? The question spills out nearly by instinct, and just as quickly Lauren realizes she's exposed her true self, the undercurrent she'd long hidden behind professional decorum. The cabin falls silent, frozen. Some passengers swivel to look, eyes wide with shock. Megan Sinclair perches her glasses on the tip of her nose, her gaze a mix of surprise and disgust. A few younger flyers actually startle, biting their lips as they sit up straighter. Silence at this point is no longer the safe choice. It's a burden. Everyone suddenly recognizes they're standing on a fragile boundary. Speak up, or become complicit in this all-too-clear injustice. In the corner of the cabin, Grace Holloway, the young assistant flight attendant, tightens her grip on her own roster, torn inside. She knows Amara Morgan's name sits in bold on the priority list, with its special annotation. Her lips part as if to protest, but Lauren's icy stare pins her silent again. Fear and helplessness wage war in Grace's heart, between a fledgling career and a conscience that refuses to look the other way. The tension is so charged that the slightest spark could ignite it all. Everyone senses the danger of normalizing this wrong. Daniel Green keeps his eyes locked on Lauren, waiting for a more fitting response than any clumsy excuse. He knows. If no one dares to light the first flame of justice, all values will collapse in shameful silence. Lauren stands alone amid a sea of people. Those who had silently backed her just moments ago have become her judges. In that instant, the power balance begins to crack, signaling the upheaval to come. No one knows that in the next few minutes, every small action will become evidence of right or of wrong, of courage or of silent complicity beyond redemption. The tension in the cabin was still heavy and suffocating after Lauren Briggs's thinly veiled prejudice slipped from her lips, but instead of backing off or considering the consequences, she dug in deeper, feeding the very power spiral she'd created. As if provoked by Amara's silent challenge, Lauren shifted from passive control to small, deliberate acts of humiliation, the cruelest kind of power play, reserved for when the powerful feel their position threatened. Lauren stepped away from their confrontation, readjusted her uniform, and began serving champagne and cocktails to each first-class passenger, all of them white or familiar VIPs to the airline. She was warm and attentive, leaning in to ask each person if they needed anything, her eyes bright with the confidence of someone who knows she's in charge. The cabin surface seemed to calm, but beneath the veneer, the air grew ever more stifling. As she passed Amara's seat, Lauren deliberately ignored her existence. Other passengers, though none spoke up, followed Lauren's every move. Some looked embarrassed, others visibly annoyed but turned away, avoiding Amara's gaze as if they themselves were at fault. This collective silence only deepened Amara's isolation in a sea of people unwilling to speak. Amara remained composed. When Lauren swept past, she simply asked, "May I have a glass of water, please?" Lauren paused, glanced down at the crowded tray of drinks, and replied icily, her tone taunting, "I'll bring you one when I finish serving." She turned on her heel and walked away, the silver tray glinting under the cabin lights. Cold, distant. Amara sat upright, refusing to look down or show any discomfort. Yet every eye in the cabin was on her, waiting to see if this young woman would lose her temper, protest, or act rude, as they expected someone on the margins to do. A few minutes later, Lauren returned with a tray of water. Instead of gently setting the glass on the table as protocol required, she angled the tray so that its edge struck Amara's foot deliberately. Just enough force to tip 3 glasses, sending water splashing over Amara's cream-colored trousers, onto the floor, and even up onto her shoes. The clink of glass on glass rang out sharply, cold water soaked into the fabric. A gasp rippled from the row behind. Lauren quickly assumed the role of the victim, raising her voice so the entire cabin could hear. "You put your foot in the aisle and spilled all that water. How careless." Many passengers turned to look. Megan Sinclair winced. Richard Thompson peered over his copy of the Wall Street Journal. A young flyer near the back covered his mouth in shock. A moment of surprise flashed across the cabin. Could any high society passenger really be that clumsy? But deep down, everyone recognized it as a dirty power play, something they'd all seen here before, yet few dared to call out. Amara met Lauren's gaze unflinchingly. Her voice was calm, low, and carried clearly through the cabin, shattering any illusion of accident. "You did that on purpose. I only asked to be treated with the same respect as everyone else." The silence that followed her words was so dense it could be felt. No one dared speak or meet Amara's eyes, but in one corner of the cabin, Grace Holloway, her hands still gripping a service tray, tears welling in her eyes, knew the truth had just been laid bare. And for the first time, the polished masks of luxury began to crack, exposing a collective shame no one could deny. The oppressive tension in first class felt like it could shatter at any moment. Yet Lauren Briggs clung desperately to the fragile remnant of her authority, even as it cracked under the weight of every accusing gaze in the cabin. Amara Morgan dabbed at the water stain on her trousers, chin held high. Her composure wasn't merely unshaken, it shone ever more brightly, holding up a mirror to Lauren's helpless fury. No harsh words, no sudden movement, just a quiet, mournful calm, born of someone too familiar with injustice to bow to it. It was that very calm that struck the deepest blow to Lauren's wounded pride. All her polished manners and professional facade collapsed in an instant. In a heartbeat, Lauren bent forward, her hand raised without warning, and delivered a stinging slap across Amara's face. The crack of the blow shattered the cabin's veneer of luxury and unspoken rules. The sharp smack reverberated off the leather walls, silencing every sound. Grace Holloway, standing just behind with a tray of glasses, gasped so sharply she dropped her napkin, her hand flying to her mouth, eyes wide in disbelief. Daniel Green leapt from his seat, rage and shock etched on his face, as though he'd just witnessed something no one ever dared imagine happening in first class. Every passenger, from the haughty regulars to the younger travelers, fell silent. A few, perhaps long accustomed to this kind of cruelty, hurriedly pulled out their phones, fingers trembling as they began to record. Under the cabin's golden lights, no one could later claim they hadn't seen, hadn't heard. Amara did not flinch. She didn't raise a hand to her cheek, nor tilt her head away from the pain. She simply held Lauren's gaze, ice-cold and serene, her cheek blooming red with Lauren's strike. There was no anger, no tears, only a low, resonant voice that cut through the endless hush. "You've just made the biggest mistake of your life." Lauren's lips trembled, her eyes flickering with confusion and fear. For the first time, she realized there was no escape. The power she'd clung to lay in ruins under Amara's unwavering stare and the stunned silence of the cabin. Every pair of eyes, those who'd sneered, those who'd enabled her through silence, had turned into witnesses and judges. In that moment, Lauren knew everything had changed. No one remained on her side. There was no silent wall left to hide behind, only the watching eyes, the recording phones, and a bone-chilling fear that true power, once stripped of its disguise, becomes the very verdict against its abuser. The tension in first class still vibrated in every breath after that slap. Lauren Briggs stood frozen, her face ashen, eyes darting wildly as if searching for any escape from the circle of judgment around her. Then a phone rang. Amara Morgan, still radiating calm, retrieved her device and tapped out a quick message into Right Skies Airlines' internal emergency channel. "Serious misconduct. I'm on flight RS-472. No explanation was needed. Anyone at headquarters would recognize that as the highest level alert for a grave breach of passenger dignity, safety, or ethics. She didn't shout, didn't cause a scene. Her control and authority were more evident than ever, even though no one in the cabin yet knew who she really was. At that moment, Daniel Green, the seasoned businessman who had quietly watched until now, rose to his feet and took a deliberate step toward Lauren. His voice rang out firm and clear, each word hammering at the fragile shield of her old authority. "You just assaulted a passenger in front of at least 10 witnesses. Are you aware of the legal consequences of your actions?" Every eye in the cabin snapped first to Daniel, then back to Lauren. For the first time, those who had been passive spectators now saw Lauren under a scrutiny that left no room for respect or admiration for her pristine uniform. Lauren panted, her throat dry, panic flickering in her eyes. She searched the cabin for some sign of support, only to be met with silence, weary headshakes, and cold stares from those who had once accepted her as the queen of first class. Desperate, Lauren glanced toward Grace Holloway, her young assistant standing trembling at the back of the cabin, clutching the passenger manifest, eyes filled with fear and inner turmoil. In that moment, Grace felt every spotlight on her, her heart pounding. Yet, when Lauren pleaded with her eyes, a last resort command based on old-school authority, Grace found a strange courage welling up inside her. She bit her lip, took a small step forward, and spoke in a voice that trembled but was clear. Her name's at the top of the list, special priority. Amara Morgan, first class, top security clearance. Her announcement crackled through the cabin like electricity. In an instant, everyone turned fully toward Amara, recalling headlines in financial journals, lists of aviation's most influential figures, interviews with America's youngest CEOs. Lauren stood rooted to the spot, her lips trembling, eyes wide with genuine terror. The truth of Amara's identity rose silently like dark smoke in the stifling cabin. The atmosphere flipped completely. Indifference turned to astonishment, arrogance into shame, Lauren's feigned confidence into utter desperation. Every passenger felt the shift. They had just witnessed a real transfer of power, not only on this flight but within an entire system thought unchangeable. And at the center of it stood Amara Morgan, the woman once doubted and belittled, now the true master of the skies, with Lauren and everyone else in first class merely along for the ride. The tension in the first-class cabin was still crackling after Lauren Briggs's slap, but she doubled down, clutching the last shards of her authority, even as every gaze in the cabin bore down on her. Amara Morgan wiped the water from her trousers, chin raised. Her calm was not only unwavering but increasingly a mirror reflecting Lauren's helpless fury. No harsh words, no sudden move, just a serene sorrow born of someone accustomed to injustice yet refusing to bow. That serenity struck like a dagger through Lauren's wounded pride. All her polished manners and professional facade shattered in an instant. With a sudden motion, Lauren bent forward, hand raised, and delivered a stinging slap across Amara's face. The crack of the blow ripped through the cabin's veneer of luxury and its unspoken rules. Every sound died. Grace Holloway, standing behind with a tray, gasped and dropped her napkin, hand flying to her mouth, eyes wide with disbelief. Daniel Green shot to his feet, face twisted by shock and outrage, as though witnessing something none dared imagine in first class. Passengers from the haughty regulars to younger flyers fell silent. A few hastily pulled out phones, fingers trembling as they recorded. Under the cabin's golden glow, no one could later claim they hadn't seen or heard. Amara didn't flinch or shield her face. She met Lauren's gaze, cold and composed, her cheek flushed where the hand had struck. No anger, no tears, just a deep, measured voice that echoed in the stunned hush. "You've just made the biggest mistake of your life." Lauren's lips trembled, her eyes glimmering with fear. For the first time, she realized there was no escape. Her authority lay in ruins beneath Amara's unwavering stare and the cabin's silence. Every pair of eyes, those who sneered, those who enabled her with silence, now judged her. In that moment, Lauren knew everything had changed. No silent wall remained to hide behind. Only the watching eyes, the recording phones, and a bone-deep fear that true power, once exposed, becomes the verdict against its abuser. The charged atmosphere in first class felt ready to explode, but Lauren Briggs refused to relent, even as her authority cracked under the cabin's collective gaze. Amara Morgan dabbed at her damp trousers, head held high. Her remarkable calm only magnified Lauren's rising panic. No harsh words, no abrupt gestures, just a dignified sorrow from someone too familiar with injustice to accept it quietly. That composure was the final blow to Lauren's fragile pride. All her polished etiquette and professional veneer collapsed. In a swift motion, Lauren leaned in, her hand flying, and slapped Amara across the face with a resounding crack, tearing away the cabin's luxurious disguise and its unspoken etiquette. Silence fell. Grace Holloway, clutching a tray behind her, gasped and dropped her napkin, eyes wide in shock. Daniel Green leapt from his seat, outraged and stunned, as if he'd witnessed the impossible. Passengers, from the haughty veterans to the younger travelers, stood frozen. Some frantically raised their phones, trembling fingers capturing every moment. Under the cabin's warm lights, no one could claim ignorance. Amara did not recoil or shield her face. She met Lauren's gaze, cold, steady, and spoke in a clear, calm voice that cut through the hush. "You've just made the greatest mistake of your life." Lauren's lips quivered. Terror shone in her eyes. Her grip on power lay shattered beneath Amara's unwavering stare and the cabin's silent judgment. Every eye, once complicit in her control, now condemned her. In that instant, the balance of power shattered. No one remained on Lauren's side. Only the witness of eyes and the proof of recording phones, and a chilling realization that power, once laid bare, becomes the very verdict on its wielder. The first-class cabin was still reeling from what had just happened when Captain Ross Wellington's deep, authoritative voice came over the intercom. Requesting immediate emergency landing at Hollow Creek Private Airport. Crew. Initiate Level 1 Security Protocol. The seats shuddered softly as the safety announcement replayed, but no one noticed the champagne or the warm glow of the lights. Every eye was fixed on Amara Morgan, the woman whose quiet resolve had just upended a decades-old power structure. Amara rose slowly, straightening her blazer as if each movement underlined her unshakable authority. Her voice was calm but carried over every other sound. Lauren Briggs, as CEO and owner of Wright Skies Airlines, I hereby terminate your employment effective immediately for gross violations of professional ethics and passenger dignity. For a heartbeat, the cabin froze, as if time itself had held its breath. Lauren, once the undisputed authority on this flight, stood paralyzed, her face drained of color, hands trembling as she clenched them together. Tears welled in her eyes and ran down her cheeks, unable to wash away the reality of the power she had just lost. I didn't even know who you were. I was only following protocol, protecting standards, she stammered, her excuse thin and desperate. Amara met her gaze, firm and unyielding. If I weren't the CEO, would you have treated me any less poorly? Here, we serve people, regardless of skin color, age, or status, and if my presence revealed your true nature, then so be it. Those who had stayed silent now found their voices. Heads nodded, some with tears, others flushing with shame. Grace Holloway, the young flight attendant's assistant, eyes red yet bright, stood close by, clutching the passenger manifest. She couldn't speak, but her look of gratitude and pride said it all. Amara turned to her, voice warm and resonant through the cabin. Grace Holloway, you upheld your professional ethics when everything around you was collapsing. I acknowledge your courage and integrity. You will receive an official letter of appointment and commendation from me as soon as we land. Scattered applause broke out, then swelled into unanimous cheers. An expression of release, not courtesy, for a new era of justice that had truly begun. Captain Ross stepped forward, snapped Lauren's staff badge from her uniform, and announced without a hint of pity, by regulation, you are barred from serving on any Wright Skies Airlines flight. Lauren sank into her seat, tears of despair falling silently. Amara, meanwhile, stood at the center of the cabin, composed, her eyes blazing with conviction. Proof that justice can't wait, and that once truth is exposed, it can transform an entire system that thought itself untouchable. The applause continued, this time for justice, for courage, and for the day the American sky witnessed a true reckoning, high above the clouds. The applause faded, replaced by the tightening pulse of every heart in first class. As the jet touched down on the private runway at Hollow Creek Airport, security personnel and federal agents were already waiting. Red and blue lights blinked against the dusk sky, reflecting off the cabin windows of the luxury aircraft. The atmosphere grew even more oppressive. Every whisper fell away into a tense silence. The cabin door opened, and two federal agents stepped aboard in dark navy uniforms, silver badges glinting under the overhead lights. The senior officer swept his cold gaze across the cabin before stepping directly in front of Amara Morgan and speaking with solemn formality. Miss Morgan, we've received a report of a serious assault aboard Flight RS-472. Would you like to file an official complaint? The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Amara lifted her chin and looked the officer squarely in the eye, her voice calm but steely, not just for herself but for every person who'd ever suffered such hidden injustice. Yes, I'm a black woman who was slapped and publicly humiliated in front of dozens of passengers on my own flight." The crowd appeared to wake from a daze. A wave of emotion rippled through their eyes. Some women closed theirs against the memory, while a few men exhaled as if letting go of a burden. Megan Sinclair, who had criticized Amara earlier, looked down in shame. Daniel Green met Amara's gaze with obvious admiration and gratitude. Younger passengers exchanged looks of respect. The agent needed no more. He nodded to his partner, then turned toward Lauren. In an instant, Lauren Briggs, once the proud authority of first class, stood small and trembling, stripped of all pretense. Tears welled in her eyes as she clenched her fists, desperately holding on to whatever dignity remained. But it was too late. A pair of cold steel handcuffs snapped around Lauren's wrists in front of dozens of witnesses. The officer recited her Miranda rights in a measured voice, each sentence severing her last hopes. "Ms. Lauren Briggs, you are under arrest for assault, violation of public safety regulations, and public discrimination under the Federal Aviation Act. You have the right to remain silent." Lauren was led away, her steps heavy, shoulders shaking under the harsh airport lights. As she passed each passenger, every gaze followed her, no one to defend her, no ally to stand by. Only the stark judgment of truth, and the eyes of those who once believed themselves uninvolved, now feeling complicit in their own silence. Amara remained standing, unbowed and resolute. Her brown skin glowed under the cabin lights, her expression weary but determined. Admiration, respect, and empathy swelled among the passengers. A young woman approached and whispered, "Thank you for speaking up. Thank you for speaking for so many of us." Amara smiled, her eyes shining with renewed hope. No longer viewed with suspicion, she had become a symbol of change, a future where justice needs no invitation and truth is restored to its rightful place. In that moment, it wasn't just Lauren Briggs on trial. It was an entire system of silence, prejudice, and blind authority laid bare under the light of justice high above the American sky. The applause had barely died down when, just hours later, images and video of the incident flooded every major social media platform. Overnight, the story transcended a single first-class flight and became a national shockwave. Clips of Amara Morgan standing up to injustice, her unwavering composure, and her powerful declaration to the federal agents circulated endlessly. "I'm filing a complaint because I'm a black woman who was slapped and publicly humiliated in front of dozens of people on my own flight." At her press conference, a simple, resonant statement went viral around the globe. Respect isn't a reward, it's a basic right. Within hours, the hashtag number, "Respect is a Right," trended everywhere, from Twitter and Instagram to Facebook and international news forums. National news broadcasts replayed the exchange nonstop, and reporters scrambled for every detail about Amara Morgan's background, achievements, and resilience. Shares and comments skyrocketed as millions debated justice, race, and the standards of civility in a country that prides itself on the pinnacle of civilization. It wasn't just everyday users weighing in. Celebrities, politicians, artists, and athletes publicly voiced their support for Amara. Many who had suffered prejudice shared their own stories, sparking a powerful movement demanding that society tear down the invisible walls in every sphere of life. The uproar forced America's largest airlines, from WestJet and Polaris Air to luxury service conglomerates, to issue immediate statements acknowledging the problem of bias and discrimination and pledging sweeping reforms. No longer were these empty promises. Carriers launched comprehensive overhauls of their hiring, training, performance reviews, and customer service policies. Under Amara's leadership, Right Skies Airlines led the way with a groundbreaking reform package. In a live-streamed press event, Amara stood before dozens of cameras, her tone calm yet resolute. No one, passenger or employee, will ever again face discrimination here for any reason. We're building a people-first culture rooted in respect, and we will transparently enforce every violation. Immediately afterward, Right Skies rolled out mandatory retraining for every crew member, ground staffer, and customer service agent. Experts in social psychology, human rights, and anti-bias practices were enlisted to design immersive, hands-on curricula, not mere theory. All employees now undergo regular evaluations of their conduct, awareness, and ability to recognize subtle discriminatory behaviors. The centerpiece of the overhaul is the 24/7 Dignity Line, an anonymous or public reporting system open to anyone, passenger or staff, to report acts of bias or discrimination. Every report is handled transparently, overseen by the executive board and personally approved by Amara Morgan. Anyone found in violation faces immediate suspension. No gray areas, no special exemptions. Within days, competing airlines followed suit, upgrading their own internal processes and ushering in a genuine revolution in service standards, one where the right to respect is a fundamental principle, not a privileged perk. Online, heartfelt testimonials poured in. I used to feel small and unworthy. Thank you, Amara, for showing me that one woman can change the sky. A bystander's silence can be more toxic than outright rudeness. This story reminds us to stand up for what's right, even if it means confronting the crowd. From a single airplane cabin, this story soared beyond borders, awakening, transforming, and inspiring millions, and laying the foundation for a new era where fairness is no longer a special privilege for the few, but an undeniable right for all. After a wave of debate, reform, and unprecedented commitments, Amara Morgan boarded Right Skies' new flight with a surprising sense of ease. Not vigilance, not bracing herself against hidden prejudices, but the calm of returning to her rightful place in the sky. The cabin remained elegant and refined, yet carried a wholly new spirit. At the entrance to first class, Julia Chen, the new lead flight attendant, age 36, of Asian descent, with experience at major international airlines, greeted Amara with a warm smile and unmistakable respect. Gone were the judgmental glances and subtle scrutiny of before. Julia simply inclined her head and said, "Welcome back, Miss Morgan. It is our honor to serve you today. Thank you for everything you've done for all of us." Every small detail reflected a renewed professional ethos. The crew adhered strictly to fair service standards, with no room for hand-picked customers or covert judgment. A relaxed, friendly atmosphere spread through the cabin, letting everyone, from business travelers to families with children, feel that respect was their default right, no longer something to demand or prove. In the row ahead, a 9-year-old black boy sat beside his mother, eyes bright as he took in the view. When he shyly asked for another glass of orange juice, Julia quickly appeared with it, accompanied by a small cookie and a respectful nod. "This is for our future pilots," she said. The simple gesture hushed the entire first-class cabin for a moment. Passengers who witnessed the earlier incident, Megan Sinclair, the Thompsons, and even those new to the flight turned to Amara with looks of admiration, as if beholding a living symbol of hope and change. No one glanced at uniforms, wallets, or skin color. They saw only a young woman whose inner strength and dignity could reset an entire industry's course. Meanwhile, Daniel Green, the businessman who had defended Amara, approached and extended a friendly hand. Miss Morgan, I used to think luxury service was just about showing off, dividing people and catering to a privileged few. But you've made me believe in this industry again. Thank you." Amara squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with genuine gratitude. She didn't need flattery. Just knowing that her actions could spark real change each day was enough. As the plane lifted off into the morning sun, there were no more invisible walls or unspoken lines between those deemed worthy and outsiders. Only professionalism, respect, and human values stood paramount above material luxury. Bathed in the soft light filtering through the windows, Amara Morgan thought to herself, "Leadership isn't about power. It's the responsibility to stand for what's right, and the greatest change always begins with human dignity." A new sky had truly opened, not only for Amara, but for everyone ever denied equality just for being different. The change didn't stop in airport corridors or first-class cabins. As the shockwaves of the incident rippled through the industry, Amara Morgan knew that real reform had to start at the roots, at the issues people had long tried to ignore. In the very first week after the Respect is a Right movement upended the service sector, Amara convened every member of Right Skies Airlines leadership team at the Chicago headquarters. The sunlit top-floor boardroom was bright, but the air was thick with gravity. Gone were the long speeches and empty rhetoric. Amara cut straight to the chase, her steady eyes scanning the room, her voice calm yet commanding. "We will no longer merely handle incidents. We must prevent them, correct them, and proactively change our culture from within." She then unveiled a clear, comprehensive reform plan. 1. 8-week ethics and service training. Mandatory for all flight crews, ground staff, customer service agents, and managers. No more cursory workshops. The curriculum dives deep into recognizing and overcoming bias, building active listening skills, managing personal authority, and learning to treat every customer with respect, regardless of background or appearance. 2. Upgraded 24/7 Dignity Line. Now, a full-featured reporting platform with an intuitive interface that lets anyone, employee or passenger, file anonymous or public complaints about discrimination, unfair prioritization, or abuse of power. All reports go directly to an independent oversight board, prioritized immediately after any safety incident. No red tape, no burying complaints. 3. Zero-tolerance discipline. Anyone confirmed to have engaged in prejudice or violated passenger dignity will be permanently dismissed and barred from employment anywhere in the Right Skies network or its affiliates. Decisions are made public with no carve-outs, no matter rank or tenure. The look the other way culture ends here. 4. Transparent personnel processes. Hiring, promotion, and performance review data, including ethics metrics, service attitude scores, and complaint outcomes, are now published in real time, creating a conscience scorecard alongside all business KPIs. Regional directors, department heads, even the longest-tenured managers, once secure in their comfort zones, felt the old order collapse. No more "I didn't know," no more colleagues covering up, no more hiding behind industry tradition. Amara locked eyes with each leader and declared, "No one can say, 'I didn't know' anymore. We cannot be a world-class airline if even one small act can wound a passenger's or colleague's self-worth." The silence that followed wasn't defiance, it was awakening. Every gaze turned to Amara, the young leader who had transformed a personal ordeal into an industry-wide call to action, proving that accountability, courage, and transparency are the only flight path to the future. A new era had begun, where every Right Skies employee understands dignity isn't negotiable. Respect is a right. The comprehensive overhaul at Wright Skies Airlines quickly became the talk of every news outlet and online forum, but Amara Morgan never saw herself as a hero. To her, what she did was simply the bare minimum a decent person must choose when confronting injustice, whether you carry the title of CEO or you're just an ordinary passenger on a flight. In the days following that dawn of justice, Amara's inbox and office overflowed with letters, emails, and messages of thanks. They arrived from every corner of America: schoolchildren bullied in their classrooms, young flight attendants forced into silence by rude VIPs, female entrepreneurs whose competence was doubted simply because they were women, even single mothers who'd wept after being demeaned in public. Parents of color wrote to share the joy of finally daring to take their kids into the first-class lounge without fear of judgment. One college student sent, "I never dared dream of becoming a pilot until I heard your story." The story spread far beyond the aviation industry, beyond a single first-class cabin. It sparked a chain reaction of courage, transparency, and human dignity, encouraging people everywhere to speak up and act, even in small ways, to stand up for their own rights and those of others in places where no one seemed to want to listen. Amara later appeared on a national TV human rights roundtable alongside veteran anchors, social activists, and representatives from other airlines. She didn't adopt an air of authority, only calm composure and genuine conviction. When asked what motivated her to risk her career, she answered without hesitation, "If I weren't the CEO, I'd have been silenced." And so would millions of others. We must speak up even without fame, because if we only defend justice when it's convenient, it's no longer justice. That line became a headline overnight, quoted on university campuses, vocational classrooms, even plastered on posters at sports events and charity drives. Many teachers posted it on their classroom doors. Justice exists only when everyone dares to speak up. No need to wait for power. In the main lobby of the new Wright Skies headquarters hangs a photograph every employee, client, and partner passes by daily. It captures Amara Morgan and Grace Holloway, the young flight attendant assistant who refused to stay silent, standing side by side in that fateful cabin. Below the image, etched on a polished plaque, are the words, "Those with the power to choose, those with the conscience to drive change." That image, that message, has become more than an airline's point of pride. It's a reminder of courage and conscience for every generation. Real change always begins with small acts by people who don't wait for power to do what's right. And like falling dominoes, businesses, schools, hospitals, and nonprofits have all established complaint processes for discrimination and launched training programs on fairness and dignity for employees, students, and the broader community. Amara won't call herself a hero. But by choosing to speak up when everyone else stayed silent, she ignited a spark of change, not just for one airline, but for an entire generation brave enough to redefine courage, justice, and respect among us all. After all the storms, Chicago's airport corridors were as busy as ever in the early morning light. Yet among the sea of tailored suits and designer luggage, Amara Morgan walked quietly toward her office, her steps no longer weighed down by suspicion or second-guessing, but by the gravity of a newfound conviction, forged in painful experience and hard-won courage. On the last flight of the week, as a fiery sunset painted the sky, Amara paused at her seat and drafted a message to her little sister back home, the girl who once cried after being taunted at school and asked, "Aren't you ever afraid to stand up all alone?" Amara smiled softly and replied, "You don't have to shout to prove your worth, but if someone denies your dignity, just stand up, and the whole sky will listen." That message was more than a private encouragement for her sister. It was the creed and legacy Amara wanted to leave for the next generation. A reminder that a person's true value isn't defined by rank, race, or anyone else's judgment, but by the unwavering choice to protect one's dignity in the face of injustice. She had become living proof that, without screaming or seeking revenge, one could shake an untouchable system through intelligence, courage, and simple human kindness. Amara Morgan's story no longer lived only in the ornate first-class cabin or the executive halls of an airline. It had blossomed into global inspiration, from young women and bullied students to workers who'd endured unfair treatment, to emerging leaders wrestling with right and wrong, each finding in her example the motivation they needed. You don't have to be a hero. You just can't stay silent in the face of wrong. In conference rooms, schools, and boardrooms everywhere, Amara's example is cited as a new symbol. A young black woman, once underestimated, who refused to bow to prejudice, who dared to stand up, and in doing so didn't just alter her own fate, but transformed an entire industry with intelligence, bravery, and compassion. International carriers now feature Right Skies Airlines policies and Amara's image in their training programs. In Right Skies headquarters, the photograph of Amara beside Grace Holloway, the young flight attendant who refused to look away, hangs in the lobby like a living manifesto. Those with the power to choose, those with the conscience to drive change. Since that pivotal event, no one in service industries dares ignore the voice of the different. New stories have emerged, young flight attendants defending vulnerable passengers, customers demanding fair treatment, each one a reminder of a new standard. Justice is no longer a privilege for the few, but a basic right for all. And though Amara shuns the spotlight of celebrity, her message continues to ripple outward, woven into the actions of millions each day. Just one person daring to stand up, enough to make the entire sky listen. This story doesn't end with a Hollywood happily ever after. It ends with a quiet yet steadfast reminder. When you refuse to stay silent in the face of injustice, you not only save yourself, you kindle hope for an entire generation to come. If this story touched your heart, please like and share it with anyone who needs inspiration, and subscribe to follow more journeys of justice, kindness, and social change. Because sometimes, one brave voice is all it takes to make the whole sky listen.